This is Grandmaster Truth. And if I'm saying it, then you know it's the God's honest truth. Today we're going to break down simple two people comparison, right? You got Michael Jai White on one side, Bruce Lee on the other side. Some of y'all have already seen the stuff on the internet. I'm going to break it down and make it real easy, and then you can make your own decision. Number one, lifestyle. Bruce Lee grew up in Hong Kong to a rich family. His father was a famous actor that put Bruce Lee in movies even as an infant. And then he had the series called The Orphan, where he did multiple movies as a little kid that was an orphan in the streets. But in real life, he had his own servants, he had his own room, his own toys, he was very well loved, all that good kind of stuff. He would get out in the streets because people were jealous of him. He'd get into a little fight every now and then, but this was not a thug off the streets. This was a movie star from the day he was born. By contrast, Michael Jai White, where he grew up, this dude grew up in the rough side of New York, right? So you're looking at a dude that was out in the streets fighting, started taking martial arts in order for him to become better at fighting in the streets against multiple attackers. You know, a lot of people nowadays with the whole Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu craze, first thing out their mouth is, you can't fight multiple attackers. But go back to the 70s, and that's the exact reason why people took martial arts, to be able to successfully defend against multiple attackers. Because gangs don't attack you one-on-one. Bruce Lee comes over here. What is his priority? Is his priority to become a champion world fighter? No. Bruce Lee comes over here because he has to flee. He gets his dual citizenship at 17 years old. Now keep in mind, Bruce Lee began studying under Ip Man at 12. 17 years old, he comes over here. So for about 4.5 years, he studied traditional Wing Chun. That's it. That's the full extent of the great master's training. 4.5 years of traditional Wing Chun, and then he began teaching when he was in college to make money. He publishes a book, Chinese Kung Fu, in 1962, to make money, because he was used to a very wealthy, high lifestyle in Hong Kong, but when he came to America, he lived at his above the restaurant that his aunt owned, and he had to work as a busboy, and he didn't like that. So he went to college, and he wanted to make money. He even wrote what was called Bruce Lee's Manifesto, where he promised that he would never have less than $10,000 in the bank, and he would be the first Asian international movie star. He wrote down what he wanted to do, and he wrote down who he was. Nothing against him, but you can't turn the man into something that he's not, and you can't tell him what he wanted to be, because it fulfills your personal fantasy, right? By contrast, Michael Jai White goes from street to martial arts. You can see him competing, and a lot of people are critical about his point fighting, for example. You got to keep in mind, during the 60s and 70s, point tournament karate was not what it is in 2022. Read Chuck Norris's autobiography, where he shows the pictures and explains how, in order for him to win the 1974 World Championships, he got his arm broke and his competitor got his clavicle broken. I did a lot of point karate fighting back in the 80s and the 90s, and I can tell you, I didn't see a single competition where somebody did not leave with nose busted open or carried out on a stretcher in the brown and black belt division. Did not happen. And back then, they didn't have headgear. For those of you who want to know the history of point karate, the padded equipment that you see people fighting with today was created by Joan Rhee. Joan Rhee is the father of American Taekwondo. He created it near the late 80s. So that's when it started catching on. Anybody who competed before the late 80s, like Michael Jai White, fought either with a piece of foam taped across their knuckles, or they had to rely on what was called controlled contact. So you fighting bare knuckle, controlled contact. And everybody said the same thing. If you're not ready to take a full power blast in the face, don't fight black belt or dope division. Period. You have to prove your right to go into that division. And here's the second thing a lot of people don't realize. All the way up to the late 90s, there was no weight divisions. None. In karate, you were ranked by age and belt only. That's it. So if you were 5'2" and your opponent was 6'7", and you were both grown men with black belts, you fought each other. Because karate, size doesn't make a difference. Nowadays, it's a sport because so many people did get hurt. The stuff was real. The stuff was real. Well, that's the era he grew up in. That's the divisions he fought in, right? Now, let's look at Bruce Lee's fighting. I don't care what old video of Bruce Lee you watch. Unless you're watching his movies, Bruce Lee never even did a demonstration without full body padding. Think about that. And never allowed anybody to hit him in the head or in the face. And he only did demonstrations with people who were white belts or his personal students. The one time he did a demonstration with someone who was not his personal student is when he went to the international karate tournament and he does the demonstration where he's trying to touch the guy before the guy can touch him. That was Victor Moore, who was the current heavyweight champion at the internationals that year. And what happened was they edited it because Bruce Lee said, "Try and touch me," and he popped Bruce Lee on the head 3 times. They edit that part out. Nobody ever speaks about that. The only people that know that are the people who were there. The part that you see is where Bruce Lee is, "I'm untouchable." Well, this is an old trick that they've used in martial arts for years. Reaction is always going to be slower than action. If I decide I'm going to hit you, that's what I do. By the time you realize where's the target and process how to defend it, I just got to gauge the distance of how much time that is. If you're way over here and I do this, and you're a person that's aware and kind of has some good reflexes, you can dodge. But if I do the little game, which I've done with Kempo people, it's like, okay, hold your hands apart, and I'm going to stick my hand in there and pull it out before you can clap your hands. You don't need any training to do that. The brain doesn't react fast enough for you to clap your hands. We do that in science class to demonstrate the time it takes for neural pathways to activate after you've had optical stimuli, meaning I see something, how long does it take for my brain to process it and then send out the next command, right? So those are tricks. Old martial arts tricks. Break the concrete, clap the hands, fast hands and all that kind of stuff. Those are tricks. It ain't got nothing to do with fighting, because the part that gets eliminated from these little demonstrations of cooperation and choreography is how hard a hit can you take? You have never seen Bruce Lee get hit. That's the part that's completely eliminated. And anybody who says, well, Bruce Lee hit like a heavyweight, is a goddamn lie. Well, how would you know? I'm glad you asked that question. Who did Bruce Lee ever knock out? The reason why I asked that question is I've heard Jim Kelly, I've heard Chuck Norris, I've heard Jackie Chan all talk about how great Bruce Lee was, how he could hit like a heavyweight. Funny thing about that is none of those guys were heavyweights. None of those guys ever fought in the heavyweight division. Chuck Norris was not a heavyweight. Jim Kelly did not fight heavyweight division. Jim Kelly fought point tournament, and he did fight some, tough people. But Jim Kelly never fought no 6'7", 300-pounder. Jim Kelly never fought nobody that weighed 250. Never. So how do you know what a heavyweight hit's like? Number two, when you sparred with Bruce Lee didn't hit. If he hit full contact, and I'm guessing if they say he hit like a heavyweight, he must have been swinging pretty hard. So if he's hitting full contact and you're still sparring with him, explain to me how that's hitting like a heavyweight. Because Bruce sparred with middleweights and lightweights who said, "Ooh, you hit hard," but he didn't break their bones. He didn't knock them out. Mike Tyson is a heavyweight. Evander Holyfield is a heavyweight. Riddick Bowe is a heavyweight, right? Tyson Fury is a heavyweight. You telling me 127-pound Bruce Lee hit like Tyson Fury? He's a goddamn lie. You on crack. But I'll tell you who is a heavyweight. Michael Jai White. Michael Jai White weighed 240. Michael Jai White is over 6 feet tall, has a serious reach advantage. I'm 5'11". He got at least a 4-inch reach advantage over me, or at least it feels that way. In terms of speed, I already told you, the tricks that Bruce Lee used, those are common tournament tricks. Those are common tricks in the martial arts to look fast. The real testing of speed is not just how fast you can move your body around. That's nice. The components of speed are what? Distance over time, miles per hour, kilometers per second. So distance and timing is what dictates speed, effectiveness in a fight. If I do this, but you're 4 feet away, that's a wasted movement. It doesn't matter how fast my hand moved, you didn't hit your target because you're not timing me correctly. I say, well, he had good timing from sparring. Okay, I can believe that. Distance. You're not going to hit a dude with a 7-inch reach advantage that can move as fast as you and has equal timing and equal distance with you. And how do we know he had good distance and timing? He competed. And when he competed, he effectively hit his opponent without getting hit. Right? We know he studied boxing, talking about Michael Jai White, because he played Mike Tyson in 1995 biopic Tyson. So you know he knows boxing. You've seen videos of him as a teenager fighting in tournaments. Wait a minute, teenager. That's interesting. If we have videos of him in the 80s fighting as a teenager, here's what's mysterious. Number one, the first thing you notice is in some of those videos, he's not wearing headgear. Like I said, he didn't have it. And guess what else he's not wearing? not wearing cup. Footgear was optional. How do I know? I was there. Now check this out. If the tournament teaches you distance and timing, because I got to hit you without getting hit, then he goes in, and that's all the way back in the 80s, right? So we know he took karate. By the 90s, he's starring as Mike Tyson, so we know he took boxing. He was in New York, so we know he rolled with Dr. Moses Powell, learned Sanukas Ryu Jiu-Jitsu. You've seen videos of him with Rampage Jackson. You've seen videos of him with John Jones. So we know he rolls with MMA dudes. This is a person who has spent his entire life just fascinated with the idea of fighting. He is literally 2 times Bruce Lee's size. Bruce Lee's 127 pounds. This man's 240. I am twice your size. I can at least match you in speed, if not be better. I have a reach advantage. I have an actual documented fight history. And I started studying earlier than you, and I studied longer than you. And anybody who goes, no, Bruce Lee studied his whole life. Bruce Lee exercised his whole life to improve his conditioning. Why? Because when he opened his school in Chinatown in San Francisco after graduating from the University of Washington with a degree in philosophy, he moved to San Francisco. He decides, I'm going to open a karate school because why? I need servants. I need people paying me money. I'm going to get all these Hollywood stars to be my students, like Steve McQueen, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all those guys side, James Coburn, everybody in the Enter the Dragon were his students, right? And what did he do? Open up the school. What happens? Chinese community comes in and they make it a racial thing now, right? Oh, you're teaching non-Chinese. Oh yeah, there was some of that. But you know what else it was? You're not a certified instructor. You studied 4 years as a teenager. What qualifies you to teach Kung Fu? Because he wasn't teaching Jeet Kune Do. He was teaching Jun Fan Kung Fu. That's what it's called. Jun Fan. You know who Jun Fan is? Jun Fan is Bruce Lee's original name from Hong Kong when he was born. Jun Fan Kung Fu. So he opened up a school and named it after himself. This is my Kung Fu. And he had no training at all whatsoever, other than 4 years of Wing Chun under Ip Man. And you telling me that's a master qualified to run his own school? No, it's not. Not if you're teaching a traditional system. Now, if you're teaching MMA, yeah, a lot of these MMA guys, they study for 18 months and then suddenly they're gods because they win fights. Okay, if you know how to win a fight, you know how to win a fight. Great, go for it. But when you say I'm teaching a system that is literally hundreds of years old, you don't know the history, you don't know the movements, you don't know the names of the movements, you don't know the whys, you don't know the lineage, you just really don't, because you were a teenager trying to find a way to fight. So you didn't study that stuff. You're really not qualified. And so they tell him, shut your school down. You don't have a right to teach because you're going to misrepresent us. He challenges the guy to the fight. Guy challenges him to a fight. Wong Man Jack, you've heard the story. Although the versions of the story I hear now are ridiculous. And the reality was, Bruce Lee lost. He was out of shape. He lost. Which brings us to athleticism. If you look at Bruce Lee, after that fight, Bruce Lee began to lift weights. He began to jump on a trampoline. He began to run every day because he found out conditioning is a very important part of being able to fight. So he studied Muhammad Ali. He studied boxing. He started jumping rope. All these things. You know who else did that stuff? Michael Jai White. The difference was he didn't have to lose a fight to learn that. He's been in shape his whole life. Find a film of him not in shape. You're not going to find it. This dude has been in shape his whole life. He's been studying fighting his whole life. He's twice Bruce Lee's size, and he has actually put himself out there, meaning I don't care what kind of competition it is. Point tournament, full contact, kickboxing, K1, UFC, whatever you're doing. When you say, I'm going to find out whether or not what I do works against a total stranger whose only intention is to hurt me, to embarrass me, to knock me out, and I'm going to put myself out there like that. When did Bruce Lee ever do it? Never. Everything is just little whispered stories from people who have made their entire living from his memory. That's the reality. If these people did not know Bruce Lee, you would not know these people. And I'm not going to call them out by name, but you know the people I'm talking about. They're still making YouTube videos. They're still trying to do documentaries. I met Bruce Lee 3 times. Even the great Steven Seagal. When I was a kid, I went and I saw Bruce Lee, and Bruce Lee nodded at me because he knew I was the one. He knew I was the chosen one. He's like, you're doing really good, man. Keep doing what you're doing, and you're just going to be the most amazing karate martial artist the world has ever seen. He knew that about me in 1973, 2 months after he died. He knew that about me. He just reappeared to me like Jesus Christ. They're still doing it. So people have motivation to keep the commercial industry of Bruce Lee alive. But the reality is, you have never seen him take a punch, and that's half of a fight. I don't care how well you're trained. You got a glass jaw, you're going down. And we don't know if Bruce Lee could take a punch or not, because no one ever talks about that. Bruce Lee has never appeared in public and even allowed people to throw strikes in his direction without a full body padded suit on. And this, again, is why I brought this up. This was back in the 60s and 70s when that equipment didn't even exist. He's literally wearing baseball bat catcher equipment that's designed to stop 100-mile-an-hour hard balls. That's literally what he's wearing. Go look at what he's wearing. There was no karate equipment back then. You go out there, you get busted up. Okay, get your butt up. Take you some ginseng, rub some ointment, some dip dot jowl, some woodlock, some wong tu yip woodlock all on your shit and get back up. Oh, it busted your lip open, you need stitches? Well, for right now, I'm not kidding, pour Coca-Cola and salt in your split lip, pull it together, try to put some tape over that shit, get back out there in the ring, and try and knock him out before that lip bust open and start squirting. That's what we did. No, that's what you did. The rule at a karate tournament was if you got hit and hurt, they didn't disqualify the other guy. You were disqualified if you were unable to continue after 2 minutes. When you saw the Karate Kid, the first one with Ralph Macchio, and he got his knee busted up, and they took him in the back, and they said if Daniel LaRusso cannot continue, Cobra Kai Dojo wins. And Mr. Miyagi did this thing, and the touch and the healing, and then he come out there with the crane technique, and that was real in the sense that those were the rules in existence at that time. You were rewarded for hurting your opponent. You could hurt them and get them out of the match. You won. Now, that's not the rules today, but that was the rules back then. So when I know from experience how tough that circuit was when Michael Jai White was fighting, and I know the training he's done in terms of boxing, MMA, jiu-jitsu, kempo, wushu, kung fu, and traveled the entire world learning from any and everybody that's willing to teach him. I mean, he's like the Black Roo from Street Fighter. And then you look at Bruce Lee, which is like, here's a spoiled kid who wrote down, I'm going to be rich. He made sure nobody was able to ever hit him without him being fully padded. He made sure publicly everything made him look like he was untouchable, but he never put it on the line in a competition. And everything you know about him is from movies or was written in books and videos by people who have profited off his name. Now, those are the facts. I could go on. You could go deeper, find out the truth of what I'm saying, but it's up to you. There's a 127-pound guy raised in a rich household who spent his life pursuing image and cash when over a 240-pound American black man from the inner city who made it to the same levels in terms of entertainment and movie industry, but started from the bottom. Bruce Lee didn't start from the bottom. It's a little bit different. When Bruce Lee made his movies that are so famous, Fist of Fury, The Big Boss, Chinese Connection, all those movies were made where? Hong Kong. Why? His dad had already given him the connections. Bruce Lee made a phone call, he could make a movie. He directed them, he starred in them, he wrote them. He didn't write Big Boss, but the next two films, Bruce Lee wrote them, directed them, and starred in them, and was given a $2 to $3 million budget in 1966. $2-3 million budget in 1966? Because we know your daddy? That's a different human being. That's a different human being, right? So, mindset, what does it mean to have that dog work ethic? How long have you been training? What was your motivation for training? What are your basic genetic gifts and statistical data? Height, reach, weight. How hard a hit can you take? Right? Consider all those things. And then ask yourself, How much of that information do you know about Michael Jai White? How much of that information do you know about Bruce Lee? And what information you know, compare it. What information you don't know, who do you really think just from common sense wins? Again, just common sense. I remember when Floyd Mayweather made the comment that he was the GOAT. And everybody put that meme out there where Muhammad Ali is looking down on little tiny Floyd Mayweather because the idea of Floyd Mayweather fighting Muhammad Ali is laughable. All I'm saying is you got brains for a reason. Don't believe the hype. Trust your own mind. You're smarter than that.